Hey y'all, so today we're going to talk about assembling the 4 blocks for the sampler bouquet. So this is if you were doing the layout of the sampler bouquet where you were making 4 blocks at a time as opposed to using the butterfly blocks. So if you're doing the butterfly block layout, this is not the most relevant video for you. It is a good one to watch if you're wanting to see how to press your seams, how to piece things together and put things together. So, but this is how like all the blocks are going to go together at the end of the day. So here I have the sampler bouquet 1, and I have all 4 blocks together as you can see here before me. So I'm going to flip it to the back side, and I think I showed this during month 1, but if I didn't, I'm going to just flip it over so we can just kind of see it together. So here I have all of my seams pressed nice and open. So for when I am putting this together, and now this is only if you are not doing the additional back. I should have mentioned that before, so I apologize for that. So I am not doing the additional, the back for Quilt As I Go. We'll talk about that at a different point. But for the layout that I'm doing is I'm going to add my backing when all is said and done. So here I have my 4 blocks flipped to the back side, and I am joining them and I am pressing all my seams open. So that is our end goal. That is what we are striving for at the end of the day. So what I'd recommend having on hand is, of course, your 4 finished blocks, some nice long pins. I have these just little I think these are 1.5 inch long, so I just like to have some longer pins on hand for this type of project. I always recommend if you were pressing something from the back side, especially if you're using stabilizer and on top of embroidery threads, I always recommend using a pressing sheet. This is the Angelina sheet. It's clear enough that I can see my stuff through it. I use this with everything, and the thing I like about it the most is that if interfacing gets on it, you can just scrape it right off. We've used these for years here, and I'm a big fan. So we are going to also need an iron, just nice and handy. I've got my nice little Aliso iron set up here, and I've got a little ironing mat underneath me. So let's look at this first set. So I have already assembled these 2 blocks, and we're going to talk about how I do my best to get my points to match up. The thing is you're trying to match the bottom corner and the top corner together before you take your Aliso sheet and lay it on top of it and you massage and iron this open. So we're going to set this to the side for just a second, and we are going to work on putting these 2 blocks together. So the first thing first is that you need to make sure your blocks all match in the center. So you're more than welcome to play with the layout, but if you wanted them all to face inward or outward or whatever, you need to do that from the beginning. You need to decide what you're doing. So what I like to do after I've got them all nice and laid out is I like to take and I put them together in pairs, and then I put the pairs together. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to flip this one on top of this one. That way I know that they're matching. So this one's nice and easy to figure out because I have a green cornerstone here on the end. Now where am I going to match this up? Well, I'm going to match it up to begin with at these stitch points on each corner. So I'm going to grab just a few of my pins, and I'm going to start right here in the corner of where the stitching ends. I'm going to take and put it through there, and then on this side I'm going to take and put it right through here. So I am matching up where the stitching on the main outline ends. Now if you have used the Vanish Light thread on it to put it together, that's fine. You can get it to come out, but I would wait until you have sewn them together because that is going to be a nice little guideline for you to use. So I just kind of massage it out, and I make sure that when I go through, the pin is staying in the previous line of stitching and the pin on the other side comes out in the previous line of stitching. So once I do one end, I just massage it till they're level. I do my best to keep those as even as humanly possible because that is our end goal. Then I'm going to come to the other side, and I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to put it right through that outside furthest corner stitch through all the layers. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to put it through this furthest outside corner stitch, and I'm going to push it through for the most part. I'm going to flip it over to the other side. I'm going to come down a bit, and I'm going to push it back through that further outermost line of stitching, and then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side and go through that furthest outermost line of stitching. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to kind of massage it out a little bit. And I know my pins are going in opposite directions, and that's okay because I've done this a million times and I can keep my hand straight with it. But I have it here, and I'm going to sew on this side so I can grab the pin at the top, and then when I get down here, I can grab the pin at the bottom. So there is a method to my madness. If it's easier for you to go in this direction, you're more than welcome to do that. Just again, keep it in the lines of stitching. But I do it this way because then I just need to put one here in the center somewhere. So I'm going to come just kind of roughly center. And again, in the previous line of stitching, the outermost one, I'm going to put a pin right through one of those. And I'm going to go to the other side and put a pin through one of that side. And then I'm going to weave it back through, again, continuing in the same line of stitching, traveling through all the layers. If there's batting, there's stabilizer, there's fabric. So just make sure you're going through all the layers, and you're going to try to get it as level as humanly possible. Just keep it nice and smooth. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take this over to my machine that I've already set up to a straight stitch, and I'm going to sew on this previous line of stitching. So forgive me as I kind of move my camera over. I want you guys to be able to see, so give me just a second to get set up over here. And then I always like to double check on stuff like this because it's so particular. I always just like to open it up and make sure that everything is roughly lined up the way I want it to be lined up, and that I'm not sewing on the wrong side. So I'm going to come under here. I'm going to pull my pin out. Make sure I'm level still. And I'm going to drop my needle down right in that corner position where I want it to go. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit on that. But I'm dropping my needle down right there on the corner, so I know exactly that I'm going where I want to be. Sorry, I'm just going to move my pin bowl over here for myself. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew, and I'm going to back stitch to get all the way to the edge. And then I'm going to come forward again. And again, I'm doing just to the inside of that line of stitching. You should be able to sew directly on it, but I've always found that I like to just sew to the inside because I am sewing blind on the back piece. So I just give myself a little bit of an allowance when I do that. Just take your pins out as you go. And if you have a stiletto and you're used to working with it, it's a great way to hold your corner edges together. Okay, and we're going to just back stitch right there just to make sure we've caught all the edges. And then we're going to just continue down, and then we're going to cut our threads. Okay. So when you've done, you've got a fairly balanced block. So now we're going to talk about how do we press it from the back side. Well, let's move the camera back over to our ironing station, and we'll look into that. Let me get to where you guys can actually see what I'm doing. So the first thing I like to do is kind of massage open the seam. So I'm just going to kind of take and finger press it open a little bit. But it does not stay open because it is a real bulky seam. But it does make it a little easier to get the iron in there if you just kind of work it open with your fingers first, if that's something you're capable of. A wood iron would also work in this situation if you don't have a lot of strength in your hands or if your fingers hurt you. I've got a little bit of carpal tunnel in my joints, and it does flare up, and it is painful sometimes. So just food for thought. But once we've got it kind of massaged open, that seam, again, like I said, I like to take the pressing sheet and put over top of it so I don't accidentally melt any stabilizer or things to my iron, and it just protects my fabric. So I put it over top of it, and it's see-through enough to where I can still see my seam, and if I need to, I just flip it back. But I'm just going to take it on top of it and set it there. So I'm not ironing, I'm pressing. So I'm setting my iron on top of it, and then I'm picking it up and I'm moving it to a new section. So see, I've created a little bump, so I'm just going to use the nose of my iron. That's one thing I love about this Oliso iron, is that it is such a great little iron. It stays so nice and hot, and it's got that little fine point at the end. I can just kind of nuzzle it in the fabric. So we're just going to kind of press this open, going all the way down. And I'm just kind of pulling this back so you guys can see where I'm going. But essentially, we're just opening that seam up. It's going to make it so much easier when we add the back if we're doing stitch in the ditch, just to hold it together, which is what I typically do when I'm adding a back on something that's already been quilted in the embroidery hoop. Okay, so once you've got your seam nice and opened, let me just set my iron to the side before I burn myself, is you're going to grab your other piece that you've already completed. If you haven't yet, go ahead and get that other one going, and you're going to line them up together. Now we're doing the same thing, we're just matching points again. So I start by matching it in the center, and then I do my two outermost corners. So I'm going to grab my little bowl of pins again, and I'm going to flip these over on top of one another. I'm going to take this center seam here and here, and I'm going to line those up to one another. Now, it's very bulky, it's very thick, so a lot of times you can't really pin in that hole. So I line the two outermost edges up as best as humanly possible, and I kind of pin where I folded the fabric over. And I do my best to hold the layers back because it keeps it from flipping on me. And I need to check the other side and make sure I've not flipped anything where I'm going to be stitching. So just do your best as far as you can with that. And if I pull this off screen, I apologize. I'm just trying to pin everything into place. Now, I like to double pin there. That is not a necessity, but that is my personal preference. But I like to pin it to hold it still there. Now, I'm going to come out to the corners. I'm going to do the same thing I did last time. I'm going to go in that previous line of stitching right here on the corners. I'm going to line those up, and I'm going to pin. Put a pin right there, put a pin right there, right through the previous line of stitching. And then again, of course, we're going to check and make sure we're doing the same thing on the other side. Where this is a little longer, you may have to flip the fabric around more just to make sure you're staying where you want your pin to be. I know it seems a little monotonous, and it is really and truthfully, but it's how you're going to get a more accurate seam, and you're not going to see that previous line of stitching when you sew if you didn't use the Vanish Light, which I did not. So we're going to come to the other side, and we're going to do the same exact thing. And we're going to come around here. Okay, wonderful. So we've got our two corners pinned, we've got our center pinned. Now I like to add an extra pin here and here just to hold some of the weight together on both sides. So let's do that real fast. Okay, so we're going to just pin it right there, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pin it right here as well. Again, just being sure you're checking and making sure your pin is going through the seam line in the previous line of stitching on both sides. That's what we're going for. So once you've got it as best as humanly possible, you're going to take this over to the machine and you're going to sew again. So forgive me as I move back over to my sewing machine. And just like before, I like to, oh, I unthreaded it. I've got my needle position set where I want it, and it's not center, so I'm having to thread it by hand, which I'm so not used to, so forgive me as I get that rethreaded. Okay, so now that I've got that, I'm going to slide my pin out again, And I'm going to put my needle right down in that corner position. That's where I like to start. You do not have to do that, but that is what I have found works best for me. We're going to lower our foot and we're going to start sewing, and then I'm going to back stitch. And then I'm going to come forward again, just slightly over the previous line of stitching is where I like to sew. And just take your time, go nice and slow so you can get the most accurate seam. Okay. Going through that bulk is always a little rough, right there where the seams meet. We're going to come all the way down, and then you're going to back stitch at the end, just to keep your stitches from coming out on you. Then go ahead and cut your threads, and then you have created your block. But we still need to continue by pressing our seams open. So we're going to take this, and I'm going to move it over to our ironing station, and then we are going to, just forgive me as I move this over once again, and we're going to press the seam open once more. So let me get this to where I can maneuver that. So just like before, we're going to massage open our stitching seam, just right here. And if you need to do this one section at a time, like do this half of the block and do the other half of the block, that's totally fine. So forgive me, this is just a bit of a process. And it does get a little bulky right here in the center. There's not much you can do about that. It's just where you've got 4 blocks coming together at one point. So I'm going to grab my iron and hopefully not burn myself in the process. Haha. So start at the edge, and I know I don't have my pressing sheet on. Do as I say and not as I do, one of those moments. I just want you guys to see, just set it on top of it, let it set for a second, and then move. So I'm going to continue on, but now I'm going to use my pressing sheet. And I want to show you that I usually have to set my iron in my center seam for a minute longer. Not like a full minute, but I just, modern terminology. My kid and his slang is catching up to me. But just set it on there for a moment longer. I usually count in my head 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, and then I move it. And it usually does a nice job if I just have the patience to sit there and count it out. But yeah, we're going to continue just to massage this open. And we're going to take that right there. So even if you're doing 1/2-inch seams, this is the method that I've always used when I do quilt as you go, when I add the additional back. You can do a 1/2-inch seam or a 1/4 of an inch seam. I'm just used to doing a 1/4 of an inch seam, and that's what I typically like to trim to. But if you prefer doing 1/2-inch seams, who am I to tell you what to do as far as that goes? But it would make no real difference. It's just the fabric would come over a little bit more, and it might honestly be a little easier to grab. I just get comfortable with what I like to do. But you guys can see that you just press the seams open and it'll lay a lot smoother. Just take extra time and care and maybe go back over some of those problem areas like your center seam. So as you can see, I'm crossing, I'm going down the opposite direction of where I've already pressed. I'm just encouraging that seam to lay really, really flat there. And I would probably go back over this with a wonderful product called Flatter. They have a fig scent that I'm absolutely wild about, but it helps your seams lay a little bit smoother. especially when you've got a really bulky seam like this. But when you're done, you flip it over, and your goal is to hopefully have this together to where you're not seeing a bunch of that stitching, and it's even as humanly possible. But that is your end goal, and when you're done, that is pretty much what you've got. So we now have our first two sampler bouquet center squares, and I'm very thrilled about that. So we'll be doing more videos coming soon. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you learned something today, and we hope to see you guys again next time. Thank you for joining us. Happy sewing. Bye-bye.